So chapter 8, Métis. Who are the Métis? Yeah. Okay, so I forgot I need to whip through most of this, so I'm not going to ask you questions. It's going to be pure lecture. Okay? If you have a question, ask me at the end of it. Write it down so you guys don't forget it. The Métis are European and First Nations. They're not American. They are not just French. They are not just English. Métis are First Nations and European descent. Biggest population of them are Red River. Their skills led them to be great additions to the fur trade. Okay? So with the change in, so the Red River was where a lot of these Métis were. And again, it was generation after generation after generation. They spoke a lot of Cree, Anishinaabe, French as well. They're Catholic. Okay? So they have it's a mixed culture. With the Rupert's Land. Rupert's Land was becoming secondary. So with the mercantilism breaking down from from Britain, Britain no longer needed Rupert's Land. So they were looking to sell it. America bought Alaska from Russia because their goal was manifest destiny. So they were going to take over all of North America. They were going to take over Mexico. They were going to take over Canada. All of North America was going to become America. With Rupert's Land, Britain didn't need it. America was expanding up. Canada made a case for it and said, we need this land because if not, we're going to be too small a country. We can't expand west. We can't connect BC to Canada, which wasn't a part of Canada at the time. So BC would have been its own country colony. Britain they did not want more America, but they would rather have a British colony than sell it to another country. So they sold it to Canada for cheap. Okay? Because of the Great Migration and all of that, Scottish people started to expand west. There was a whole bunch of contractors and surveyors, and they were coming by and they were trying to mark up the land so that they could start to sell it. The Métis thought this was wrong, so that they started to fight back. Okay? There was one person that died. It wasn't a big deal. It was one person. It was an English. It was a Scottish person. Okay? When that person died, there were little skirmishes and little battles, but the Métis eventually came together and made a council. I forget what it was called. Yeah.
The Pemmican document.
No.
Métis provisional government.
Yeah, the Métis provisional government. Okay, so the provisional government. The provisional government were the Métis government. They made up their own government and said, this is how we're going to rule. And they were led by Louis Riel. Louis Riel was a French, he was a Métis lawyer who went to Quebec to study. He was actually engaged to a Quebecois, like a Canadian, a daughter of a wealthy individual. The father found out that Louis Riel was a Métis and called off the wedding, prevented his daughter from marrying because he was Métis. He wasn't accepted in Quebec because he was French, he was Métis. He wasn't accepted in Ontario because he was French. So again, you can see where these Métis don't fit and they need their own culture. With the expansion west, they were trying to force assimilation onto them. The Métis fought back with their provisional government. They elected Louis Riel. Louis Riel eventually negotiated with the Manitoba Act, the creation of Manitoba. They all got scrips, which is land. Okay, they were given land, and they were allowed to do with whatever they want for it. Okay, Manitoba would have its own provincial government. Both French and English would be used in the government and courts. Province would be able to send 4 elected members to the House of Commons and 2 to the Senate. 2 publicly funded school systems, 1 for Protestants, 1 for Catholics. So you can see this is not assimilation. This is accommodation. Okay, They're accommodating them 100%. They're making it okay. It's a negotiation, and Macdonald didn't want to destroy these people. He gave them what they wanted, okay? An area of land would be set aside for the Métis to use, and the natural resources of the new province would remain under the control of the government. This meant that unclaimed land belonged to Ottawa, okay? So these scripts that they were given, they were not recognized by most people. So they started to, the land that they were given was crap. It wasn't really farmable. It wasn't great land. There wasn't a lot of buffalo to hunt anymore because the buffalo were dying. The Scottish people continued to move in without a care. So the Métis started to sell these scripts and move west to Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan's still Rupert's Land at the time. So where did the first place? It was the very first rebellion took place in Rupert's Land because there was no such thing as Manitoba at the time. The second rebellion took place in Rupert's Land because there was no such place as Saskatchewan. Okay? Because of the killing of the Scottish guy, Riel had to run away. He was exiled, so he didn't have to go to jail. They didn't kill him, all that stuff. So he was exiled. He went to the States. He came back 20 so years later, okay, in the second rebellion. The second rebellion was all about force. They didn't want to negotiate anymore because the last time they negotiated, the government of Canada said, here's land, here's going to be great, you're going to govern yourself, and nobody listened to them. So if they're not going to listen to, they have to fight for what's theirs. You can't negotiate anymore. They've tried that. It doesn't work. So they started to fight them. I think 800 people died. Again, not a huge number, but it's a big enough number that we, as Canadians, kind of recognize it. The railway became a big part of this because in 2 days it took all the troops from Ontario outside to Rupert's Land and got them there before it exploded into thousands of deaths. 800 people died instead of thousands and thousands, and that's a big part because of the railway, okay? So it was 16 years later, not 20. Okay, so the similarities, the government ignored the warning. There were a whole bunch of warnings beforehand. They were trying to talk to the government saying, like, this isn't fair, this isn't fair, this isn't fair. The government ignored them, again, trying to assimilate them and said, we've given you your land. If you don't like it, suck it up. We're not going to give you more land. So again, they got pissed off, but there were a ton of warning signs coming around. Okay. There's the fight. It talks about the Cree joining in. At the end of this, the government tightens its grip. So at the end of this, they could have pardoned Louis Riel. They kind of, after destroying a lot of the Métis, they came to an agreement. They could have pardoned Louis Riel and a couple of the other leaders, and instead they just let them be hung. Okay? Louis Riel was hung to death because of his involvement in the second Métis uprising. This sends two messages to the First Nations people. The very first one was that the government was accepting and open to negotiations. Okay? So it was an open discussion. It was a dialogue that was willing to happen. The second was if you don't accept our terms, we're going to kill you and we're going to kill your leaders. So the next time the leaders wanted to come in and they were having problems, you had two choices. We can destroy you and just kill you, or we can start to negotiate. And hopefully we just stick to this negotiation. With the numbered treaties, Macdonald did promise them food, had a policy of starving them every other day. He would feed them. Said, we'll give you farm equipment and teach you how to farm. He never did it, but that's in the numbered treaties later on. Are there any questions?